On an early summer evening in rural Tennessee, a man and his dog were out for a walk when they came across a grim discovery. A young mother killed and then abandoned on the roadside. Her identity was unknown, but that would not stay the case for very long. The investigation that followed uncovered significant evidence pointing to just one somewhat unlikely suspect. But there was far more to this case that was yet to emerge. Years later, even the seemingly indisputable proof became questionable and misleading, and new theories of the crime just kept appearing. Hi everyone, I'm Kevin and welcome to Just Thought Lounge. Here at JTL, we deliver serious, well-balanced coverage of the cases that really make you think. Today's case offers up a lot to contemplate. There are quite a few players, multiple personal accounts, a tight timeline, contradicting physical evidence, and at the heart of the case, a young victim that no one had reason to harm. Let's take a look. Greene County sits on the eastern border of the state of Tennessee. About 7 miles from the town of Greenville is the small community of Afton, set in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. It is a rural area, dominated by open landscapes and scattered homes. On the evening of the 12th of August, 2016, Donald Kahn Jr., a local resident, was taking his dog for a walk on Judd Neal Loop, a short one-lane circle that had about 4 or 5 houses. It was not frequently traveled. It was about 7:30 p.m. when Donald wandered towards the creek on the side of the road. According to Donald, people sometimes dumped trash and animal carcasses down the creek on the loop. But on that evening, someone had left more than an animal carcass in the woods. There, lying next to 2 trees and near to a barbed wire fence, he came across a woman's body. Donald stood at least 6 feet away. He saw no need to approach her for a clearer view. A call to 911 was placed upon his return home, bringing local law enforcement, followed by the TBI, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, out to Judd Neal Loop. Greene County Sheriff's Department Detective James Randolph arrived on scene at roughly 9:30 p.m., 2 hours after Donald had made the discovery. The detective observed that the victim was a younger woman. She appeared to have suffered significant head trauma and had reddish-brown stains on her clothing. He also found that she had bruises on her arms, cuts on her hands, and what appeared to be a broken finger. It was deduced that the wooded area where she was found was not likely where she had been killed. There was no identification on the victim. But only hours later, a concerned mother and a fiancé turned up at the Greenville police station. 21-year-old Jessica Morrison had been missing since that afternoon. The young mother of 2 had left her boys, aged 1 and 3, with their grandmother and had not returned home. She had been 16 weeks pregnant. Jessica Morrison had been identified by the photos of her tattoos that her mother, Tammy, had shown to police at the station that night. Tammy and Jessica's fiancé, Gary Ely, had sought out police assistance at about midnight, following hours of being unable to reach Jessica by phone or ascertain her whereabouts. They were initially told it was too soon to make a missing persons report. Jessica had only been missing for a few hours at that point, not days. But unfortunately, their worst fears about Jessica's well-being had materialized when law enforcement realized Jessica was the victim discovered out on Judd Neal Loop. An autopsy revealed that Jessica had died as a result of multiple blunt force injuries to the head. She also had abrasions and contusions to the chest and back, and the ring finger on her right hand was fractured. Investigators deduced that the blows had been delivered by a tire iron or something similar, but the murder weapon was not located. Law enforcement began scouring the area in case a weapon had been discarded in the vicinity. In doing so, they discovered items of potential significance scattered on the roadside. On Tyne Gray Road, they found a pair of shorts, a diaper, and paperwork related to Jessica's eldest son's doctor's appointment. He had just undergone oral surgery that morning. Searching Babbs Mill Road, investigators found pieces of Jessica's cell phone cover, a medical wristband with her child's name printed on it, pieces of her driver's license, a pack of Marlboro cigarettes, and a bag of cereal. Additional items such as medical paperwork for the 3-year-old was found scattered on Betsy Ross Road. That was about 3 miles from Judd Neal Loop. Tammy and Gary told police that they had already been tracking down Jessica's movements that day. The last person to see her alive, they said, was her eldest son's grandmother, Vonda Smith. Vonda's son, William Smith, had a short-lived relationship with Jessica several years earlier. The result of their 2 to 3 week fling was 3-year-old Channing. William has stated that the two had not been together romantically since. Although William and Jessica had long since ended their relationship, Vonda, the proud grandmother, had been a regular presence in the lives of Jessica and her 2 boys. When Jessica could not be reached, Tammy went out to Vonda's. There, she found her grandsons in Vonda's care, but Jessica had been dropped off at home hours earlier, Vonda said. Tammy said she felt that something was off. There had been tension between Vonda and both Gary and Tammy for some time. Jessica had arranged for Vonda to babysit her children that weekend, but according to Gary, Jessica had canceled those plans last minute, and the older woman had not been pleased. Tammy and Gary agreed one thing about Vonda. She inserted herself too forcefully into the lives of the boys. This is what they told law enforcement on the night of Jessica's death. It was 2 a.m. by the time detectives arrived at the home Vonda Smith shared with her husband Roger on Davis Valley Road. It was roughly 3 to 4 miles from the loop where Jessica had been discovered. Detective Randolph and his colleague recorded the interview conducted with the grandmother that night. The detective had the unenviable task of telling Vonda that the mother of her grandson was found dead.
We need to talk to you for just a minute.
Me?
Yeah, we got to give some information.
What is it, honey?
She's, if you read what it takes, she's dead. Is there anything you can think of to help us?
And Jesse's dead? I did not see her.
He asked Vonda to explain when she had last seen or spoken to Jessica. Vonda did not, as Tammy had claimed, state that she had driven Jessica to her home. She instead told the detectives that Jessica had turned up at her work at about 1 p.m. that afternoon, asking for help with the boys. The youngest, Camden, only 1 year old, was acting out. She couldn't do anything with him, Vonda stated. The 50-year-old had been an insurance clerk at Laughlin Hospital for 25 years. But her family was her top priority. So when Jessie showed up that day, she left work and the two went to Food City to buy groceries for her and the boys. The trip was subsequently confirmed by video surveillance captured at the store between 3:07 and 3:43 that afternoon. The bags of groceries were then dropped off at the home Jessica shared with her fiancé Gary and his father, J.D. Ely. The unpacked bags were left untouched when Tammy arrived at Jessie and Gary's later that day looking for her daughter. But what had become of Jessica after that? Vonda told Detective Randolph that Jessica was also behind on other bills, so Vonda gave Jessica money and the keys to her car.
How much money would you give her at the time?
Let's just say thousands.
There.
I paid to have her lights turned on. They cut her lights off one day. I had to go get off from work, go get the boys. They turned her lights off.
How long would that be going on?
It's all the time.
She ran through quite a bit.
And it wasn't that I cared, but I couldn't let those two boys or her do without.
Man, you're right.
I give her the money, and then she went to pay bills. I know she said she was going to pay her car. And she said her rent, and then the phone minutes.
So, how did she leave?
In my car. And that was the last time I physically saw Jessica.
Jessica left in her white Pontiac Sunfire to pay her bills. Then, at about 6:30 p.m., Vonda's car was returned to her, parked at the end of the drive outside of her house. Vonda told the detectives that she observed a white van pull up at the same time. She saw a man whom she assumed was Gary Ely get out of the car and into the white van.
And like I said, also white van.
And all you know is the van was here and your car was here, but you don't know how your car got here.
Like I said, I did not see Jeff literally see them when they brought my car.
The detectives asked Vonda's permission to search her car, which she gave, but with a warning. The interior, she said, smelt of cat urine. Her sister-in-law, Peggy, owned a cat that had relieved itself in the front passenger seat earlier in the week. Vonda had subsequently bleached the seats, but the smell, she said, lingered.
It smells cat piss. Tetanus.
It stinks. And like I said, we cleaned it.
The house?
The car.
Oh, you cleaned the
Because
car.
cat pissed all in it.
When did that happen?
Wednesday.
Wednesday you cleaned it? Oh. So not tonight.
Looking at the white Sunfire, they noticed reddish-brown stains on the seat, console, and the corner of the passenger side windshield. Detective Randolph also noticed a circular pattern on the passenger side window, perhaps caused by someone wiping the glass to clean it. The car was taken back to the lab where TBI processed it, and what they found was blood. DNA analysis confirmed it was Jessica's. It was unclear what, if anything relevant, was discovered inside of the house, but the state of Vonda Smith's car was damning.
3 p.m. The body of a 21-year-old white female, Jessica Morrison, was discovered along the side of the road on Judd Neal Loop. A joint investigation by special agents with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and the Greene County Sheriff's Department has resulted in an indictment of an Afton woman on 2 counts of murder, first degree. This week, the Greene County Grand Jury returned an indictment charging the grandmother, Vonda Starr Smith, that is the grandmother of Jessica's child.
The blood evidence in the car had led investigators to a theory of the crime, supported by the correspondence they found between Vonda and Jessica when analyzing Vonda's cell phone. The grandmother had grown accustomed to caring for Jessica's 2 boys regularly, sometimes 3 to 4 days a week. But more recently, Jessie had been keeping them at home or with her other family members. Having patched up her rocky relationship with her mother, she had also been canceling time with Vonda in favor of spending more time at Tammy's. That weekend, Jessica had yet again abruptly canceled plans to have both boys stay with Vonda. Detectives believed that this was the trigger. After all of the help Vonda continued to provide to Jessie, and she was being denied time with the boys.
I'm sure she wanted to keep the boy, and Jessie told her no. He had had surgery that morning. And I guess it just got out of hand.
There were arguably a few inconsistencies with the state's theory. Perhaps the most glaring was that Jessica had been the victim of a sustained and brutal attack consisting of multiple blunt force blows. Her own defensive wounds indicated that she had put up quite a fight. Vonda's defense questioned whether she was even physically capable of this act. 52-year-old Vonda Smith stood 2 inches shy of 5 feet in height. That is 147 centimeters. Vonda was also in admittedly poor health and overall physical condition. 21-year-old Jessica Morrison, conversely, was in good health and was 5 foot 6 inches tall. There had been no drugs or alcohol in her system, only a small amount of caffeine. Furthermore, Detective Randolph observed no scratches or bruising anywhere on Vonda Smith when he visited her home on the night of the murder. Could Vonda have committed this brutal murder without leaving a single mark visible anywhere on her body? Key to Vonda's defense was the ability to corroborate key elements of her story. First, that she had provided both cash and her card to Jessica after their grocery shop at roughly 4 p.m. If Vonda had given Jessica $1,000 to pay her bills that evening, this cash was unaccounted for. Investigators found that no bills had been paid. Indeed, her rent and utilities were not overdue, as Vonda had stated. Nevertheless, there were only a few cents discovered in Jessica's pocket when she was found. The money, if it had existed, was gone. Vonda's defense presented a series of witnesses that called into question the timeline of events that day. First, two of Jessica's neighbors, Edward Hitchens and Jason Matthews, each independently seemed to confirm that Jessica had been at home at around 5 to 5:30 that day. And crucially, that a white van, similar to the one Vonda had reported seeing, was present at her property. Edward testified that he saw two men inside a white van at roughly this time. Jason then testified that he saw Jessica arrive home in a car at about 5 p.m. and then get into a white van. So who owned a white van that could have been seen by Jason at Jessica's house that evening? It seems that Gary's father, J.D. Ely, had spent the day with a friend, a man named Dudley Hudson. And Dudley, it turns out, owned an older work van, white in color, and was driving it with J.D. that day. J.D. told the police that he and Dudley stopped by the home around 4:30 or 5 p.m. When he testified in court, however, he revised this to 3 p.m. Each of the two friends, J.D. and Dudley, provided each other with an alibi that accounted for their movements throughout the full day and evening of August 12th. However, J.D.'s credibility was questioned when he was asked about drug activity and weapons charges pending against him from the previous year. On the stand, J.D. took the Fifth Amendment against self-incrimination in response to these questions. He also claimed that he did not have drugs in his system on the day Jessica was killed. Vonda's defense also sought to verify her claims that she cleaned her car days before the blood was discovered inside it, not the night of the murder. Peggy Carter, Vonda's sister-in-law, told the jury that while Vonda was visiting with her and her husband the previous weekend, they saw her cat exiting the Pontiac Sunfire. Peggy told them that the cat had probably sprayed the car. She said that the cat had done this on other occasions, and she later had a conversation with Roger about removing the smell. She told him to try using some bleach. The bleaching of the bloodstains certainly suggested that Vonda was trying to cover her tracks. However, Vonda maintained that there was no blood in the car when she used it again that evening. At roughly 7 p.m. on the 12th, Vonda arrived, driving her Sunfire, at the home of a woman named Sharon Bergner. Sharon was also a grandmother. She and Vonda were friendly. Sharon's home was about 20 miles from Vonda's house, and the drive would usually take about 40 minutes. Vonda arrived to collect Sharon's granddaughter, 9-year-old Emma. Emma was the daughter of her son William's girlfriend. Sharon Bergner testified that she and Vonda discussed a cat having urinated in the car at Aunt Peg's. Grossed out by this, Emma retrieved a towel upon which to sit when she got into the passenger seat. Sharon stood on both sides of the car during their interaction, and Emma had climbed inside. Crucially, both claimed that there were no bloodstains visible to them at 7 p.m. that night. She would not have allowed young Emma to get into the car had she seen bloodstains on the seats, Sharon said. Yet, this interaction occurred only a half an hour before Jessica was discovered on the loop. If the car had been used to transfer her, the stains had to have already been there. DNA samples collected from Jessica also painted a murky picture. The TBI found that there were at least 3 different DNA profiles, all determined to be male, found under Jessica's fingernails. These samples were limited, meaning finding an exact match would be difficult, but they were nonetheless tested against men with known connections to Jessica. These were her 2 young boys, Vonda's husband Roger Smith, Vonda's son William Smith, as well as her fiancé Gary, his father J.D. Ely, and J.D.'s friend Dudley Hudson. All of these men were excluded as sources of the fingernail DNA. Similarly, there was an unknown male profile found on her discarded driver's license. Where there was a female DNA profile identified on the discarded items, testing against Vonda Smith excluded her as the source. Fingerprints lifted from the car were also ambiguous. A print lifted from the visor matched to Vonda, but that's not strange, it was her car. Even more curiously, there was sperm found on Jessica's underwear from at least 2 individuals, and an additional swab from that area also contained 2 male profiles. One of these was a match to Gary, the fiancé. The sample also, by extension, matched JD, since they are father and son. But the second male sample remained unidentified. Bizarrely, given the circumstances, the TBI did not conduct a paternity test to determine the father of Jessica's 3rd pregnancy. Gary, as well as others, assumed the child to be his. Tammy Morrison testified at Vonda's trial, however, that Gary and Jessica had broken up for a period of 2 months in March of that year, 4 to 5 months before her death. A blood spatter expert determined 2 things to be true of the bloodstains found in Vonda's car: that the car was only used to transport Jessie, it was not the site of her death, and that the blood was not planted after the fact. This was determined by the placement of the stains, which appeared to have formed from a figure Jessica's size seated in the passenger seat. This would have been almost impossible to fake later. The blood was also found to have been mixed with cleaning products, primarily bleach. The only explanation was that someone had tried to clean the blood after Jessica had been in the car. Whether she was the one who delivered the blows or not, Vonda had almost certainly been the one to clean the car. This could not have taken place earlier in the week, as she had claimed. The possibility of an accomplice never came up at trial. The murder weapon was never found, and the exact location of the killing has not been determined. Vonda did not take the stand in her own defense. On the 25th of May, 2018, a Greene County Criminal Court jury found Vonda Starr Smith guilty of 1 count of first-degree murder for Jessica Morrison's death, and 1 count of second-degree murder relating to the death of her unborn child. Judge John F. Duggar Jr. sentenced her to a life prison term. She would be considered for parole after serving 51 years, making her sentence an effective life term. Vonda was also handed an additional 25 years for the second-degree murder charge, though the sentences are to be served concurrently. While Vonda prepared to appeal her conviction, the case caught the interest of criminal defense attorney and television personality Ron Kuby. The attorney is famous for taking on cases of questionable convictions and having them successfully overturned. His investigation into the case of Vonda Smith raised questions about her guilt and suggested that she may have been covering for someone else. Vonda's appeal pointed to the DNA, which was found under Jessie's fingernails, and to various unidentified fingerprints found on the physical evidence. Her team argued that the evidence shows, at most, that her car was used to transport Jessica's body, but not that she perpetrated the fatal beating. The state presented no evidence that Vonda was injured, despite the evidence of a violent attack against which Jessie fought for her life. Vonda also argued the evidence showed that she loved Jessica like a daughter, and she had no motive to kill her. Vonda's appeal was denied. Afterwards, she spoke with Ron Kuby and his team. She said it wasn't Gary Ely that she saw dropping off her car that evening with the white van after all. She had accepted that Gary had an alibi. He was at work until at least 7 p.m. In a bombshell accusation offered too late to help her defense, Vonda now claims that the man she saw with her car that night was her son, William. Those close to Vonda, including Aunt Pegs and Grandma Sharon, insist she is innocent of the murder. Multiple character witnesses testified to her calm temperament and loving nature.
That she just a good person. Nobody is her.
Vonda's husband Roger and son William remain confused by her more recent claims. Tammy Morrison has since had her own encounter with law enforcement, as has J.D. Ely, who is currently serving time in a federal prison for drug charges. In addition to the investigative dive performed by Ron Kuby and his team, there has been a book published by local residents, and many blogs created, arguing passionately for Vonda's innocence. And that was the tragic story of Jessica Morrison and the conviction of Vonda Smith. Thanks for watching. I'm Kevin. This is Just Thought Lounge, and I'll see you in the next one.